O tome kako Europa može postati energetski neovisna razgovaram s gospodinom Maratom Terterovim, glavnim predstavnikom i osnivačem Brussels Energy Cluba. Mr. Terterov, welcome to our program.
Hvala. Thank you. Hvala
very good.
much.
So you're a long-standing expert on European energy policy. What is your assessment of the current state of European energy transition in this light of ongoing geopolitical tensions and the need to reduce dependence on Russian energy sources?
Thanks for that question. Very relevant one, I think, in today's energy landscape. Look, I think fairly positive. I think most people maybe have a poor institutional memory. They forget quickly. Context of European energy transition has very deep political, social, policy level foundations in Europe. It's not something that's just come out of a vacuum. It's something that has evolved over probably a good 20 plus 30 years, almost a generation of European energy policy. Yeah. This is something that's come out of European environmental objectives originally. It is something that's been accelerated by the climate movement in Europe, by young people going out there and advocating for the future of our planet, sustainability. And of course, it's been augmented very strongly by game-changing developments such as the Paris Agreement on Climate in 2015. Yeah, the COP meetings as we know them today. Now, in saying that, while my own assessment is positive, you've got a foundation here, a lot of political support. Since the Russian war in Ukraine has really accelerated in 2022, we of course have seen, European governments scampering, looking for, additional gas supplies, additional energy supplies, going to Azerbaijan, going to Qatar, some European green politicians sort of being not so green and turning grey in many ways. I remember Robert Habeck, the German Minister of Economy, of course, in that respect, traveling to the Gulf states. So I think, there is this perception that, Europe's energy transition has been derailed by geopolitical tensions. And indeed, I would say, the price crisis that we saw in gas and electricity markets in Europe during the winter of 2022-23 has been like a real heavy energy security moment for Europe. Yeah, energy security came back. It was like young people have forgotten 1973 when the International Energy Agency was actually established, when the Arab-Israeli wars were taking place. So Europe has kind of gone through this moment, but prices since have, of course, stabilized. Prices have gone back to pre-2022 levels for gas and electricity. And I think we, myself being in Brussels and being a witness to this, we see that the European Commission and the main backers, let's say, of the energy transition are very much back on track and moving forward with sustainability objectives. But that does not mean that there is no challenges, in Europe achieving its objectives. And I think, some of the biggest challenges, which briefly we can mention now, are things like the decarbonization of transport in Europe. This is a really big challenge, yeah, because we still very much rely on fossil fuels. Europe is very much import dependent. We know from history that energy transitions take a long time. In the 19th century, it took us a good 100 years to move from wood being the driver of the international economy to coal. And then we moved from coal to oil, in the early 20th century. But yet coal is still such a major player when it comes to generation of electricity, sort of in both Europe as well as around the world today. So energy transitions take a lot of time. Decarbonizing transport, airplanes, trucks is going to take time. The biggest challenge for Europe today will be those tough political discussions between Brussels and the member states about combustion engine vehicles, about bans that are being pushed, and to find this middle ground between an almost ideological debate driven in Brussels to the real practical, hard-nosed, business and lobbying and politics, within the European sort of landscape.
Now, when it comes to this plan to eliminate Russian gas, oil and nuclear energy by 2027, where do you see the biggest hurdles in that regard?
Well, this is a little bit like the old question of can states control markets? Okay, can a state tell market actors what to do? Okay, states are responsible for passing laws, establishing the rules of the game, in all economic sort of spheres and more broadly, and certainly here, because the European states, when the Russian war in Ukraine, really accelerated in 2022 with this invasion. Basically the message from the states was, we no longer want Russian energy, as a kind of a retaliation or as a response, and indeed as support for Ukraine, which is perfectly justifiable policy measure to take. But while market actors in Europe, and I'm referring particularly to gas consumers, big companies that buy gas from, all kinds of sources, not just Russia, also Algeria, Norway, LNG, they did not support the war, but they did not want to become collateral damage of it either. Gas trading relationships are very long term. Gazprom worked with European consumers on the basis of long-term supply agreements. These supply agreements, started including elements of flexibility, spot markets, liberalization of pricing and trading sort of measures. But the relationships were still there, and it became very difficult, for both parties, the consumers who needed the gas to sort of power industry and satisfy their both contractual as well as consumer requirements, but also they had to, kind of fall in line with the positions of the state. So where we are now is that there are still some supply agreements in place between Gazprom and European consumers. There's a lot of pressure now coming from Brussels to phase these out and end them sort of even earlier. But nevertheless, we know that many of the LNG terminals around Europe are still receiving Russian LNG. So if there's a shortfall of Russian pipeline gas, there's kind of more LNG coming in, from Russia. So it's not clear how it will evolve. And I think at the moment we're really looking at how the market will continue to react to these pressures from Brussels.
Now, talking about LNG, the LNG from the United States has risen very much in Europe since 2022. The United States has also become the main supplier of oil to the EU since then. How do you really see this potential, perhaps, risk of creating a new energy dependence, this time on the United States instead of on Russia?
Well, look, I mean, there's a couple of ways to answer that question. Maybe I'll try to have a little sense of humor initially and be a bit provocative. It's a bit like asking the question about who blew up Nord Stream 2. Okay, this is a major pipeline project that was, going to be a new umbilical cord between Russia and Europe in terms of gas supply, and who had the capacity to do it, who could have actually wanted to do it. Now, we know that Ukraine has been lobbying against Nord Stream 2 for 10 years, because this would have equated to a loss of income from transit of Russian gas going through Ukraine to the European Union. Now, we also know that Poland has been lobbying against it in support of Ukraine. So some European and non-EU governments have been against the project for a long time. But then again, your point about the Americans and American LNG, American energy diplomacy has also been very vocal in supporting Ukraine and Poland, supporting Ukraine's sovereignty through these incomes that it earns from transit royalties, which is very valid. But is there a hidden agenda here from the American, let's say, business lobby and gas export community? Because originally, some people may recall that American LNG industry was actually set up to receive Russian LNG. Like 20 years ago, there was a huge project called Stockman in the Barents Sea, northern Russia, in the Arctic sort of regions of Russia, to actually produce gas and ship it as LNG to the US. Now, after the shale revolution in the US and the abundance of gas from the mid-2000s, America had a surplus of gas. Its economy became, powered by gas, became very cheap energy, and they had surplus for export. So since then, you've had a strong American push for exporting US LNG. And of course, after 2022, there's a logical sort of conclusion that, under the Biden administration, America and Europe were fully in solidarity. So therefore, Europe should actually take American LNG. And the share has increased in European gas imports. However, nothing comes for free. There's no wedding gifts at this party here at this wedding. Norway is a supplier to Europe. Algeria is a supplier, the Gulf states, and the US has actually joined this bandwagon. And these are all hard-nosed business people that commerce is a big part of it. Whether this gas will be, let's say, I don't think it'll create a new dependency because Europe is still looking to diversify its basket, and the US will not be the sole producer, like Russia was, the sole supplier, like Russia was the major supplier, because you always have other suppliers, and Europe is also looking at the Caspian countries at the moment. So I don't think we're going to get a fully fledged dependency, but I think we shouldn't expect too much from the Americans either in that respect.
And just in conclusion now, through disinformation campaigns, Russia is seeking to sort of influence and slow down this European energy transition. In your view, how can EU institutions better coordinate responses to these hybrid threats that sort of combine the weaponization of energy and information warfare?
Well, I'd slightly rephrase the question. I don't really think genuinely that Russia's looking to undermine or, slow down the energy transition in Europe. There's no real political capital in this. There's no real financial capital in this. Russia's interest certainly would be to maintain a level of market share in the European gas imports market, because this is both a substantial revenue earner for the Russian state, and it's also a factor of some level of geopolitical leverage over European sort of policy. So it's not like Russia wants Europe to produce less electricity from renewable energy, because if there's going to be gas anyway in electricity production for a long time in Europe. So the main objective for Russia is potentially to keep a share, but at the moment that's not looking optimistic. I want to highlight that, because recently, I believe it's public information that the Gazprom office is closing in Brussels, the representation which maintained an energy dialogue, with the European institutions, and indeed that Russia is reorienting its export, supply capacities to the eastern markets. China, it's looking to establish partnerships with countries like Pakistan, which have very substantial gas supply requirements. So I think that's the main sort of aspect of the discussion. What does Russia do with its gas? Its gas is not going to disappear. Selling it domestically, it's not very profitable. Gasifying the society, yes, the Gazprom as a state-owned company has a public responsibility, but it also needs to be commercially profitable. So this is the biggest question for Russia. Can it actually maintain some level of market share in Europe based on that first question you asked, these relationships that are still there, and markets don't always want to do what states want them to? So this is the key question. I don't think it's so much about the energy transition. Russia itself is endorsing the Paris Agreement on climate, so it's not totally out of the sustainability sort of discussion at an international level. But it's certainly not about the energy transition.
Just about maintaining its market share within Europe, within the EU.
Yeah, because it is a substantial still revenue earner for the Russian state.
Thank you, Mr. Tetero, for this analysis.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. Thank you, Natasha.
Bio je ovo Marat Terterov, glavni predstavnik i osnivač Brussels Energy Cluba, o planu Europske unije za postepenim ukidanjem uvoza ruskih energenata do 2027. godine. Gledali ste Spotlight. Ostanite uz program Bloomberg Adria.